Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Derek Sanders and Matthew Collins grew up together like soulmates. Anyone who saw the two of them running through the sandy streets of Seabrook Cove would never have imagined that one day their paths would take such different directions. There, everything was simple. Mornings were filled with impromptu soccer games and afternoons dragged on between dives into the salty waters and innocent promises of eternal friendship. They shared secrets, laughs, plans for the future, and even some silly dreams that seemed huge for two boys. Matthew was always the kind of guy who was content with the present. He liked the quiet routine, the small joys the town had to offer, and believed living there forever would be enough. He worked alongside his father, helping with boat repairs, learning about fishing nets, and living without rush. Derek, on the other hand, carried a restlessness in his chest. From an early age, he said he wanted more. He was the type of kid who disappeared with a book under his arm and came back full of ideas about business, money, and achievements. Time passed, and each followed the path that seemed natural for their choices. Derek studied hard, left the city, graduated in administration, and started building his own fortune. With dedication and vision, he opened stores in various parts of the country. His clothes were elegant, his watches drew attention, and his name became associated with success. Meanwhile, Matthew kept the same life as before, his face marked by the sun and his spirit light from someone who was satisfied with what he could achieve with his own hands. He did repairs, fished when he could, and always found a way to live with dignity. Throughout all these years, even though their paths were so different, they still spoke to each other from time to time. They exchanged some calls, short messages on birthdays, but the distance between them wasn't just physical. Derek always remembered Seabrook Cove with a mix of nostalgia and longing. And it was precisely because of this feeling that he decided, on an impulse that mixed emotion and strategy, to open a new store in the city where it had all begun. He thought it would be the perfect project to unite the success he had achieved with the past he cherished so much. He didn't just want to open the store. He went beyond that. He also bought a house in the city, a place where he could stay whenever he wanted to visit the store, see old friends, and spend time with family. The house was simple, but cozy, and seemed like the ideal setting for a peaceful retreat between business trips and commitments. The store's opening became an event in Seabrook Cove. The whole town showed up, curious to see how the boy who once dreamed big had turned into a respected businessman. Among greetings, smiles, and pats on the back, Derek reunited with Matthew, who, despite a certain discomfort, made sure to attend. When their eyes met, the entire past seemed to come alive in an instant. They shook hands like old friends, and for a brief moment, the weight of the years seemed to disappear. Their conversation was quick, but sincere. Matthew asked about the stores, the travels, Derek's achievements. In turn, Derek wanted to know how Matthew's simple life was going, the fishing trips, the temporary jobs, and the stories of the town. It was clear that there was still respect between them, despite the glaring differences that life had imposed. Derek mentioned that the store needed someone trustworthy for general work, someone who knew the city and had good hands for the job. Matthew smiled, with that calm way of someone who doesn't expect much from life, and said he could help, at least for the duration of summer. Derek accepted immediately, believing that giving a chance to his childhood friend would be a way to repay everything they had shared in the past. He found it beautiful to combine success with roots, as if that could fill a space that had always been empty in his journey. That night, after closing the store following the inauguration, Derek felt at peace. The city was once again on his path, the old friend was nearby, and everything seemed finally in place. But not every reunion is actually a gift. Sometimes, the pieces move silently, preparing the ground for something no one expects. And that decision to offer a chance to his childhood friend was only the first move in a game that would change everything. The routine in Seabrook Cove seemed to find a perfect balance between the past and the present. Derek divided his time between business trips and visits to the city. Every time he arrived, it was as if part of his youth was being reclaimed, and this brought him some comfort. The store thrived. The residents quickly adopted the place as a meeting point, and Matthew, now working there frequently, performed his duties efficiently. Between simple repairs, delivering goods, and chatting with customers, he became a constant presence in Derek's life again. Claire, Derek's wife, also felt quickly welcomed by the city. With her elegant demeanor and charming smile, she won people over easily. She enjoyed walking the streets, visiting cafes, and chatting with the locals. The beachy climate and the light atmosphere of Seabrook Cove soon won her over. One afternoon, while having coffee together on the porch of the house, Claire mentioned that she would like to spend more time there. She explained that the tranquility of the city was good for her, that the slow pace was exactly what she needed to relax. Derek listened attentively, and although his schedule was full, he understood his wife's desire. Business required him to travel to resolve issues in other cities. He looked into her eyes and promised to leave her there so she could enjoy the summer at her own pace, while he took care of his commitments. They agreed that he would return in 10 days to pick her up, and Claire, with a light smile, accepted the proposal, saying she would make good use of the time. In the following days, Claire got even more involved with the city. She frequented the store, chatted with the staff, and eventually crossed eyes with Matthew, who continued to be dedicated to his work. The residents commented on how well she seemed to adapt to the place, praising her kindness and elegance. It was hard to imagine that behind so many smiles, something different was taking shape in the background of that apparently tranquil routine. Derek, on the other hand, left on his trip with a calm mind. He believed everything was under control. He gave clear instructions to the store manager and trusted Matthew with some extra tasks, precisely because of the old trust he still held in their friendship. Before leaving, he exchanged a quick handshake with his friend and a goodbye kiss with his wife, convinced that upon returning, he would find everything just as he had left it. During the first few days of his trip, Derek barely thought about Seabrook Cove. He was immersed in meetings, contracts, and negotiations. The nights were occupied with business dinners and expansion plans. Occasionally, he received messages from Claire, telling him about the sea, the walks, and the lightness of those days. She said she was enjoying reading some books she had always postponed. The report seemed innocent, and Derek felt satisfied for having provided his wife with some deserved rest. He even mentioned to a colleague that the trip had been providential, as it helped strengthen their relationship even more. He felt calm and secure, believing his life was finally aligned, with a rising career and a harmonious marriage. Meanwhile, Claire remained immersed in the routine of Seabrook Cove. The walks along the beach, lunches at cafes, and visits to the store became constants. Conversations with Matthew began casually, always relating to work or the city. However, as the days passed, the closeness increased. The glances lasted longer than necessary, the smiles carried a silent intensity, and the words, once innocent, began to take on a different tone. Claire and Matthew, without realizing it, started getting closer at a dangerous pace. The fact that Derek was away, busy in other cities, seemed to facilitate that silent game. Claire, enchanted by Matthew's simplicity, began to see in him a freedom she hadn't felt in a long time. Matthew, in turn, felt flattered by the attention from such a refined woman, something he never imagined he would experience. On a regular afternoon, when the store was quieter, the two met in the back of the establishment. Initially, it was just a conversation, a quick moment away from the curious eyes of the town. But the words took another direction, and what started with a compliment about her perfume soon turned into a touch on the hands, a deeper look, and, without either of them being able to avoid it, the limits were crossed. Meanwhile, Derek was far away, completely unaware of what was happening in Seabrook Cove. His focus was on spreadsheets, contracts, and goals he needed to achieve. He had no idea that, right at that moment, something was about to turn his life upside down. Each minute away from the city was, in fact, another step toward a pain he never thought he would feel. Claire, torn between guilt and desire, continued the game, convinced she could control the situation. Matthew, blinded by charm, ignored any consequences. The town, unaware of anything, continued its calm rhythm, while the hidden plot behind the scenes of the store gained increasingly dangerous contours. And what seemed like an innocent request to spend a few more days of rest in the city was, in fact, the beginning of something that would completely get out of control. The 8th day of Derek's trip began like any other. He followed his schedule of appointments, not imagining that, on that very morning, a phone call would change everything. The store manager, Lucas, called with a trembling voice. He rarely interfered in personal matters, but what he had witnessed went beyond any limit of silence. Without beating around the bush, he told him that he had caught Claire and Matthew in the parking lot at the back of the store. The words came out with difficulty. He said that by chance, he had gone to the back to check a delivery and ended up witnessing the scene. Claire and Matthew were together, completely absorbed in each other, in a moment intimate that should never have happened. Lucas described every detail, still stunned. He said the two of them seemed oblivious to any possibility of being discovered. That place, where boxes and merchandise used to be left, was now the stage for something shameful. Lucas recorded the scene on his phone, driven by a sense of justice and the obligation to protect the boss. He didn't hesitate for a second before recording it, knowing that it was too serious to rely solely on words. Derek, upon hearing the report, fell silent for a few seconds. His head spun. Everything around him seemed distant. The manager, on the other line, pleaded with him to check the video, which would be sent shortly. The call was ended, and a few minutes later, the recording reached Derek's phone. Every second of that image was like a blade cutting through his certainties. His heart beat unevenly as he watched the video. There was no room for doubts or interpretations. It was all there, too clear, too painful. Claire and Matthew, together, in an act that dismantled years of trust, loyalty, and history. Derek stood up without thinking twice. He left all his commitments behind and immediately arranged his return to Seabrook Cove. During the flight, his mind spun non-stop. He mentally reviewed every conversation, every glance, every detail he had ignored in the last few days. It was as if suddenly everything made sense. The supposed tranquility of Claire, Matthew's discreet smiles, the casual messages she sent. Now, everything seemed part of a carefully disguised script. Upon arriving in the city, he went straight home. Claire was in the living room, distracted, as if nothing had happened. Derek entered, with a closed expression and fixed eyes on her. He took out his phone from his pocket and, without saying a word, simply handed her the device with the video already open. Claire took the phone, confused. But within a few seconds, her face turned completely pale. Her hands began to tremble. She looked at Derek, unable to say anything, but the tears started flowing uncontrollably. Her reaction was a mix of despair and guilt. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Finally, she managed to stammer that everything had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, something that did not represent what she truly felt. She begged him to believe, swore that it would never happen again, that it had been a foolish impulse, a lapse she herself couldn't explain. Derek, firm, listened in silence. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't need to raise his voice. His cold, direct gaze said more than any words. When she finished justifying herself, he simply turned his back and left. He walked to the store without losing focus. Upon arrival, he went directly to Matthew, who was in the warehouse, organizing some boxes. Without hesitation, he communicated the dismissal right there, with few words. Matthew, taken by surprise, tried to explain, tried to apologize, but Derek was categorical. He said that certain betrayals don't even deserve an argument. The dismissal was just the beginning. Derek went further. He knew where Matthew lived and who the owner of the property was. Without wasting time, he made an offer for the house, high enough for the owner to accept immediately. Within a short time, Derek was the new owner. On the same day, he notified Matthew that he had to leave the place. The decision was not motivated only by anger. It was a clear and direct message, a definitive cut. Matthew, with no options, saw everything he had collapse before his eyes. The city soon stirred up. The residents, used to the calm pace and small secrets, were surprised by the speed of events. Some tried to comfort Matthew, others simply observed, fearing to get involved. Humiliated and with no alternatives, Matthew packed his things and left. He left Seabrook Cove with the same simplicity with which he had always lived, carrying only a few bags and the shame of having destroyed his own life with an impulsive decision. The decades-old friendship, built with so many memories, was now just an irreparable ruin. Claire stayed in the city, surrounded by the silent contempt of the neighbors. Matthew disappeared down the road, as if he had been swallowed by the wind. Derek, firm, continued his path, aware that he had imposed an end worthy of the betrayal he had suffered. That chapter, which had started with innocence and nostalgia, was now definitively closed. The divorce between Derek and Claire dragged on less than many expected. After the scandal that swept through the town, Claire had no choice but to admit everything in court. Lawyers were called, documents presented, and, although the pain still burned inside him, Derek handled each detail of the process with the same coldness he applied to his business. He knew that moment required more rationality than emotion. As painful as the situation was, the laws were clear. The years of marriage, which had begun in youth, weighed heavily in the process. Everything built throughout that union, every cent, every property, every investment, was now on the table, divided mercilessly. Claire was entitled to half of everything. She didn't hesitate to claim what was hers, backed by the law, aware that, even though she was rejected, she would leave there with a considerable fortune. Derek, seated in front of lawyers and judges, watched everything with the same firm expression. Inside, his heart ached, but he wouldn't allow anyone to see any sign of weakness. He signed all the papers without complaining, watching every line as if he already knew what was coming. At the end, when the judge struck the gavel, declaring the end of the marriage, he simply rose and left as someone who had just buried an entire past. With the divorce concluded, Derek was left with half of the stores, including the one in Seabrook Cove, which now caused him revulsion. Without hesitating, he decided to sell it. He no longer wanted any connection with that place, nor with the store that, once, represented a dream. As soon as he received a reasonable offer, he accepted immediately, without making any effort to negotiate prices or conditions. For him, the price mattered little, as long as he could cut all ties with the city. In addition, he put both houses he had bought up for sale. The first, which served as his refuge during his visits to the city, and the second, which he had acquired solely to evict Matthew, now had no purpose in his life. He sold both almost at the same time, ready to accept any offer that came up. Each sold property was like a door closing, ending a cycle that had caused him too much pain. Derek didn't look back. He got rid of everything that bound him to that past, with the firm intention of never returning. His only focus was moving forward, away from anything and anyone that had been part of that story. He left without looking back, determined to start anew, far from any trace of Claire or Matthew. He moved to another state, where he had some stores, and rebuilt his life. He wanted peace, a kind of calm that money had never been able to buy. While Derek rebuilt his life, the city continued its course. Stories spread through cafes and corners. Matthew had vanished from Seabrook Cove, leaving only memories and a trail of shame. Some said he had started over in another coastal city, surviving as he always had, with odd jobs and small tasks, without great expectations, merely existing in the middle of a sea of regret. Claire, in turn, began to feel the weight of her own choices. Although she had left with a fortune, loneliness was a ghost that accompanied her at every corner. She tried to maintain the standard of living that money provided, but the years spent with Derek had left her dependent on a comfortable lifestyle, and without his discipline, the fortune started slipping through her fingers. Poor investments, impulsive purchases, aimless trips, and closed stores. Before long, she found herself forced to drastically reduce her lifestyle. Old friends in the city avoided any contact. On the streets, warm smiles gave way to distant looks. Claire lived surrounded by cold walls, far from the glamour she had once flaunted. She realized she had traded everything that really mattered for fleeting moments of desire. Every morning, she was forced to live with the reflection of her choices, and no matter how hard she tried to escape that truth, it was there, present in every bill that arrived and in every memory that tormented her. Years later, while Derek prospered in his new city, his name began to appear in business news again. His face appeared on magazines, now as a more mature man, with a journey marked by highs and lows, but who reinvented himself with intelligence. During an interview, they asked about his past, about what he had learned the most from the entire journey he had undertaken. He smiled in a contained way, like someone who had already made peace with the past, and answered with a simple sentence, yet heavy with everything he had lived through. He said that sometimes the biggest losses bring the biggest gifts. He explained that if he had kept everything he lost, perhaps he would never have found the serenity he now possessed. Derek became a reference not only for financial success but for the ability to rise from a brutal fall. Meanwhile, Seabrook Cove remained asleep, trapped in its routines, without even realizing how much that city had been the starting point of a story that would teach the world one of the bitterest and most valuable lessons about betrayal, pride, and freedom. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
It all started on that Friday. Jason spent the entire morning with that uncomfortable feeling in his chest, a strange weight, as if something was about to happen and he still didn't know the extent of the impact. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept going back to the conversation he had with Madison early that morning. She said she was going out with her friends that night, something common in her speech lately. Only that day, her tone sounded different. There was something strange in the way she avoided looking him in the eyes, as if she feared he would see something hidden. She was in a hurry, anxious, and carried her bag as if it held a heavy secret inside. Jason noticed every detail. Small things, but together they formed an impossible-to-ignore warning. During lunchtime, he could no longer concentrate on anything. Not even the taste of the food seemed important. He kept thinking about Madison's gaze, the way she avoided any affection, the forced smiles she had been handing out in recent weeks. Her coldness wasn't new, but that day everything seemed to have reached another level. Something inside him said there was much more behind this story of going out with friends. He didn't know if it was intuition or paranoia, but he wasn't willing to wait for the truth to fall into his lap. When he finished lunch, he made the decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to the office like he did every day, he took a detour and went straight home. He didn't tell anyone, didn't send a message. He wanted to see with his own eyes what was happening. On the way, his heart beat like an offbeat drum. Every mile driven seemed to increase the urgency in his chest. He tried to convince himself that he was overreacting, but the premonition didn't fade. On the contrary, it grew stronger with every second. As he turned the corner onto their street, something immediately caught his attention. A car with tinted windows was parked near the house, as if waiting for the right moment to disappear. Jason recognized that car right away. It didn't belong to any neighbor or someone passing through. He knew that model very well, knew exactly who it belonged to. As soon as he saw it, he felt his stomach churn. That image was enough. It was as if life itself was rubbing the truth in his face, without giving him a chance to escape. He parked further ahead, far enough not to raise suspicion. He grabbed his phone, activated the camera, and walked on foot to the back entrance of the house, the same one he always used when he wanted to go unnoticed. His heart was racing so fast it felt like it was about to jump out of his mouth. With each step, the air grew heavier. The door was unlocked, another clear sign that something was wrong. The house was immersed in an eerie silence, almost disturbing for a Friday afternoon. Jason kept his phone recording, fingers steady on the screen, and moved through the rooms until he reached the main hallway. That's when he heard the first muffled laughs, a low sound coming from the bedroom. Intimate laughter, full of complicity. His blood froze. With short breaths, he approached the slightly open door. One gentle push was enough for his world to collapse before his eyes. Madison was there, lying on the bed, her body entwined with Derek's. Derek Foster. The friend he considered a brother, his trusted business partner, the man who frequented his home like family. The two were completely absorbed, without the slightest shame, laughing as if they owned the world. Jason remained motionless, watching everything through the phone screen, recording every second of that repulsive scene. It was as if his brain refused to accept what was in front of his eyes. The two people he trusted most, destroying everything so blatantly. The pain hit him like a precise stab, but the anger was even stronger. He dropped the phone on the dresser and lunged at Derek, determined to tear apart every inch of that betrayal with his bare hands. He screamed, charged forward, but Derek, in panic, escaped in a humiliating manner. He ran toward the window and jumped, fleeing without even getting dressed, leaving behind the trail of a coward. Madison, in shock, curled up on the bed, her face pale and tears streaming down. She tried to say something, mumbling incoherent words, saying she had made a mistake, that it had been a moment of weakness. She writhed in sobs, desperately trying to justify what couldn't be justified. But Jason didn't listen. It was as if her voice didn't exist at that moment. He pointed firmly at the door, without needing to say anything. Madison, desperate, begged to stay, kneeling, pleading for forgiveness. She tried to grab his legs, begging for another chance. But Jason maintained his coldness. He opened the closet, grabbed her suitcases, and began stuffing her clothes, one by one, without caring about the crying or screams. Each piece thrown in was a piece of the life he was determined to bury. When he finished, he dragged the suitcases to the front door and threw them onto the porch, without looking back. Madison left carrying what was left, crying like someone who finally understood the magnitude of the damage she caused. Jason slammed the door shut, locked all the locks, and stood still, his chest still burning with anger and disgust. He picked up the phone, ended the recording. Turned off the device and remained there, standing, staring at the emptiness of the living room, where every corner of the house now seemed to carry the weight of that betrayal. Her scent still lingered in the air, the pictures on the walls showed memories that had lost all meaning. Jason didn't cry. He just took a deep breath, knowing that afternoon had marked the end of an entire life. Nothing would ever be the same again. And, as painful as it was, that was only the first step. The next morning, Jason woke up without feeling any heaviness in his body. He slept little, but enough to wake up with a determined mind. The image of the betrayal, which the night before seemed like a fatal blow, now served as fuel. While preparing coffee, he knew the messages would start arriving. It was obvious that Madison would try to explain herself, just as Derek, despite his cowardly escape, wouldn't stay silent for long. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as he turned on his phone, it was flooded with dozens of notifications. Missed calls, messages, emails. Madison begged to talk. She wrote that she needed a chance to clarify everything, as if there was anything to explain after what he witnessed. Derek, on the other hand, sent cold messages, appealing to their long friendship, asking that he at least hear him out before making hasty decisions. Jason read every word with the calmness of someone who had already moved past anger. It was like watching a predictable movie where all the lines were rehearsed. Instead of responding, he archived everything. He knew those messages would be useful soon. He knew the laws well and understood exactly how to use them to his advantage. After a quick shower, he got dressed and went to his lawyer's office, who was already waiting with the necessary documents for the divorce. He presented all the evidence he had, the recorded images, the messages, the call logs. Everything detailed, everything timed. Each detail clearly showed the adultery and the breach of trust. In the state where he lived, the law still allowed adultery to be used as grounds for a contested divorce. It was a unique opportunity to resolve everything quickly and definitively. Jason didn't even need to explain much. The evidence spoke for itself. Within a few days, the petition was filed, with all the details organized to prevent Madison from contesting anything. She wouldn't even be able to touch the assets since the house and the company were acquired before the marriage, registered solely in his name. Moreover, her own behavior during the marriage eliminated any possibility of claims. While the process moved forward, Jason focused on the second part of his plan. There was something else that needed to be resolved with the same coldness. Derek was still a partner in the company, albeit with a small share. It was impossible to ignore this detail. They shared businesses, accounts, and contracts. But Jason knew exactly how to get out of this situation without losing control. He carefully reread the company's bylaws and smiled when he saw the clause he had inserted years earlier, foreseeing the right of first refusal. It was a card he kept hidden, and now was the perfect time to play it. With everything prepared, he scheduled a meeting with Derek, in a neutral location, away from prying eyes. He arrived with the contract in hand, accompanied by a lawyer, and got straight to the point. He offered a fair amount for Derek's share of the company, as the contract stipulated. He presented the terms clearly, leaving no room for negotiation. Derek, pressured and without arguments, accepted the offer. He knew refusing it would be useless. In a matter of minutes, he signed the paperwork, transferring his share and officially ending the partnership that had once been a source of pride for both. For Jason, that moment was symbolic. It wasn't just a business deal. It was the definitive closure of any connection between them. Derek's signature on those papers was, for him, a silent confession of guilt and cowardice. He stood up, picked up the signed contract, and left without saying a single word. Derek stayed behind, with a lost look, like someone watching their world crumble before their own mistakes. In the following days, Jason followed the progress of the divorce with the same discipline he always applied to his business. Each hearing was a victory. Madison couldn't argue at all. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge reviewed the documents, listened to the recordings, and didn't take long to make a decision. The marriage officially came to an end. The house remained with Jason. The company was already fully under his name. Madison left the courthouse carrying only the shame and memories of everything she destroyed. Jason, on the other hand, left with something much greater than assets or signed papers. He left with the conviction that he had regained control over his own life. Every move had been calculated. Every decision, thought out in meticulous detail. Now, without a wife or a business partner, he was finally free to move forward as he pleased. What few people knew was that, behind that calm face and apparent serenity, there were still plans to be executed. Plans that, soon, would show that the story was far from over. The purchase of Derek's share in the company was just the beginning. Jason wasn't satisfied with simply dissolving the partnership and finalizing the divorce. The betrayal he suffered had crossed all limits, and he would never accept that everything ended as if it were just another slip-up in the business world. There was something inside him that demanded retribution. Not out of wounded pride, but because of how Derek, over the years, had built an image of integrity while, in reality, wearing a mask. Jason spent days reviewing old contracts, email exchanges, meeting minutes, anything that could prove Derek's actions had directly harmed the company. And he didn't have to search hard. With every document read, the pieces fit together in an almost frightening way. There were records of decisions Derek had made without the knowledge of all the partners, favoring suppliers with whom he had personal relationships. Additionally, Jason realized that the wear and tear caused by the betrayal also affected the company's market position. Some old clients stopped closing contracts, citing discomfort in dealing with a company surrounded by internal scandals. With everything in hand, Jason consulted his lawyer again. He explained, in detail, the impact of Derek's actions, both internally and externally on the company's image. The experienced lawyer smiled as he heard the account. He said there was a legal path for this. A lawsuit based on a specific law that protects companies from intentional interference that harms their operations. It was called tortious interference with business relations. It was exactly what Jason needed. The lawsuit was filed with surgical precision. Every document attached, every message, every recording. Jason exposed everything, detailing how the betrayal wasn't just a personal issue but also a maneuver that weakened the company's reputation. The court received the case, and a few weeks later, the first hearing was scheduled. Derek was summoned and, in front of the judge, tried to maintain the demeanor of a serious and committed businessman. But as the evidence was presented, his expression began to change. The recordings showed much more than a simple extramarital affair. They revealed a duplicitous behavior, where Derek used the workplace to hide meetings, diverted clients, and, between the lines, undermined the company's image from within. The testimonies of former employees, confirming the toxic environment he created, were crucial to the case. Derek's defense tried to argue, claiming it was all a personal settlement between two ex-partners, but every attempt was easily dismantled by the robust evidence Jason had gathered. The judge, attentive to every detail, made it clear that he saw a serious case of intentional interference in commercial relations. After days of intense hearings, the verdict was delivered. Derek was ordered to return the full amount he received for selling his share of the company. Additionally, the court imposed a hefty fine for the damages caused, both financial and moral. The amount was so high that, for many, it would be impossible to pay without jeopardizing their entire personal assets. Jason didn't celebrate the decision immediately. He knew Derek's downfall was just beginning. As soon as the news spread, the few professional contacts Derek still had began to distance themselves. Doors that once opened easily for him started closing one by one. No one wanted to associate with someone with that kind of stain on their record. While Derek dealt with his own collapse, Jason turned his attention to Madison. The divorce was already finalized, but he knew there was one last wound to expose. During a careful review of personal finances, while organizing old documents, Jason found something that would change the course of the story. Among contracts and bank records, he discovered a series of suspicious transactions made by Madison months before the betrayal came to light. Significant amounts had been transferred to an unknown account, always with vague descriptions and weak justifications. Intrigued, Jason hired a specialized forensic accountant to investigate. The results revealed that Madison had embezzled money from joint accounts into a private fund, opened in the name of third parties, with the sole purpose of hiding resources before filing for separation. The transfers were meticulously planned, made gradually over the course of an entire year. She had built a sort of secret reserve, out of reach of any judicial agreement. This blow wasn't directly related to the betrayal, but it showed that Madison had been plotting a financial attack long before everything surfaced. She was ready to leave the marriage taking as much as possible, and the betrayal was just the trigger for a much larger plan. Jason gathered all the reports, bank records, and transaction receipts. Every penny embezzled was documented, and with this material in hand, he filed a new lawsuit against her, accusing her of fraud and concealment of assets during the marriage. This new lawsuit, based on concrete evidence, put Madison in an even worse situation. In court, she was forced to return all the money she had hidden, in addition to paying heavy fines and legal costs. The defeat was humiliating. She not only lost what she tried to protect but was also publicly branded as dishonest and opportunistic. Jason, upon closing the case, felt he had finally closed all doors to the past. The case became a local scandal. Madison, who had tried to rebuild her image as a victim of an unhappy marriage, saw her reputation destroyed publicly and definitively. During the hearing, it became clear that she not only betrayed but acted in a calculated manner to benefit financially. The judge didn't hesitate to hold her responsible, ordering her to pay a significant compensation. In the end, Jason recovered every cent he had lost and even received additional compensations. For many, the outcome seemed like a cold victory, but for him, it was the closing of a cycle of pain and disappointment. Derek lost all his assets, had to sell properties and vehicles to cover his debts. Madison, now bankrupt, was avoided even by old friends, who preferred to distance themselves from the scandal. Jason, on the other hand, remained silent. He never said a word about the matter publicly. He simply observed everything crumble in its own time, without rushing. Every move he made was calculated, like in a chess game where the opponent doesn't even realize they've lost until checkmate is delivered. Everything was in place. And what no one knew was that Jason still had more plans for the future. Plans he would keep hidden until the right moment to reveal them. Time passed like a storm that sweeps away everything in its path and then disappears, leaving only what is strong enough to remain standing. 2 years had gone by since the day Jason put an end to everything. The faces, the voices, and even the pain no longer occupied space in his routine. It was as if they had been ripped out and cast into some forgotten corner of memory. The city gossiped, as it always did, but for him, the only thing that mattered was the feeling of having won a war without raising his voice to anyone. Meanwhile, Derek's life turned into a complete disaster. He tried to recover, but with each attempt, more doors closed. Old contacts disappeared, investors avoided him, friends cut ties. Debts began to pile up, and one by one, the assets he had left were sold hastily, just to cover the judgments brought by the lawsuit. The properties, the cars, even the shares of smaller companies he had bought over the years, all were gone. The man who once paraded with an air of superiority now lived doing odd jobs, struggling to survive in a city that knew every detail of his downfall. In cafes, in conversations, his name came up as an example of arrogance and recklessness. Jason didn't mind hearing these stories. He knew it was all just the natural consequence of someone who chose the wrong path and laughed while betraying the people around him. Madison took a different path, but equally cruel. After losing the lawsuit, she had to sell what was left of her personal belongings to pay off the debts she had accumulated over the years. The friendships that had once been her refuge vanished. Gradually, people began to see her as a selfish and cold woman, marked by the scandals she herself fueled. She tried to rebuild her life alongside another man, someone she met during that forced fresh start. She clung to this new relationship as her last hope of escaping the image of defeat that followed her. At first, the relationship seemed like the rebirth she had longed for. But as the months went by, history repeated itself. She discovered that the man she shared a house with was having affairs with other women. Ironically, the same kind of betrayal she had orchestrated now replayed before her, only this time, she was on the opposite side of the story. Neighbors whispered on the streets about the constant fights, the frequent scandals in this new relationship. Madison lived surrounded by mistrust, jealousy, and an emptiness that neither luxury nor fleeting loves could fill. Meanwhile, Jason led a life many would consider enviable. After resolving all the lawsuits and fully clearing the company's name, he received an offer he never expected. A multinational group, known for its aggressive negotiating tactics, offered a multi-million-dollar sum to acquire the company he had rebuilt. He thought long and hard before accepting, but realized it was the right time to close that chapter once and for all. He signed the sale, transferred all operations, and, with the fortune deposited in his account, made a definitive decision. He packed his bags and moved to Miami, determined to start a new life, leaving no trace of what was left behind. He bought a spacious house where no one knew his name or his story. He opened a small local business, without grand ambitions, just to keep his mind busy and his heart at peace. His circle of friends was limited, consisting only of people who respected him for who he was at that moment, not for what he had achieved before. What many ignored was that, despite his apparent tranquility, Jason still kept track, from afar, of the consequences his decisions had provoked. At a casual dinner, while chatting with a childhood friend who was passing through the city, he heard a comment that fell like a kind of epilogue to everything that had happened. The friend mentioned, amidst laughter, that Madison had been betrayed by her current partner. He said that after so many ups and downs, she now lived embittered, trapped in an unhappy relationship, with no prospects of change. Jason didn't react with surprise. He simply listened, in silence, and continued his meal. At the end of the dinner, as he raised his glass, he toasted discreetly, with a faint smile and a phrase spoken almost like a whisper, something not directed at anyone but carrying the weight of all he had lived through. Without haste, he looked at the horizon and said to himself, with absolute serenity, like someone who understands the value of their own path, whoever destroys a home will sooner or later end up sweeping their own ashes. And with that, he definitively closed that chapter of his life, without regrets, with only the certainty that some victories don't need applause, because the true reward lies in the peace that only silence can offer. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jack was there, on the couch, with the remote control in his hand, distracted by the program playing on TV, when the sound of the doorbell interrupted the silence of the house. For a brief moment, he thought about ignoring it, pretending it wasn't for him, but there was something about the persistence that made him get up and head to the door. When he opened it, the impact was immediate. Standing before him was Megan. She looked different, worn out, as if time had taken its toll. Her eyes revealed sleepless nights and a whirlwind of emotions. Without saying a word, she stared at Jack, her expression mixing regret and desperation. She asked to come in, her voice trembling, almost as if seeking refuge. Jack took a deep breath. It was clear that this was the last thing he wanted, but still, for some reason he couldn't explain, he gave in. He stepped aside and let her in. Megan crossed the threshold with her head down, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Jack closed the door, still unable to believe she was there, in front of him, after everything. He went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water, just to keep his hands busy and push away the tension starting to build in the air. As he poured the water, memories surfaced like a blow, bringing back all the pain he had worked so hard to bury. It had all started simply, the way the biggest tragedies often do. Megan casually mentioned that she had been invited to a party with her co-workers. She brought up Amanda, the host, as if talking about any random colleague, but Jack knew exactly who she was. Amanda had always been involved in stories he preferred to stay away from. She was known for her attention-seeking ways, extravagant parties, and irresponsible behavior. Jack never trusted her and had made that clear from the start. He tried, with as much calm as possible, to explain his concerns to Megan. He openly expressed how he felt about the party, about those people, about how uncomfortable he was with the idea of her attending that event. Megan, however, reacted coldly, as if his words were just a minor annoyance. She downplayed everything, saying he was overreacting, that it was just an innocent gathering among colleagues. The argument didn't take long to escalate. Jack, already tired of feeling disrespected, got straight to the point. He looked her in the eyes and said, in a firm voice, that night would mark the end of their marriage if she walked out that door. There was no more room for conversation, no more patience left to deal with actions that broke the trust between them. He was clear. He said the marriage depended on that moment, on that choice. Megan, with a defiant look, didn't hesitate. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and left, as if his decision were just another insignificant comment. Jack remained frozen, not even moving a muscle. Everything inside him screamed, but he stayed silent, simply watching as the woman who had promised to walk beside him chose a different path, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. There, in that silent living room, their marriage was already dead. And still, seeing Megan back after all these years stirred something in his chest. As he handed her the glass of water, Jack kept his face calm, but inside, it was as if he were reliving every detail of that night that changed everything. The old pain seemed to mix with a bitter curiosity. After all, what did she want now? Why had she come back, after so much time, after everything that was said, after everything that was done? She held the glass with both hands, as if trying to shield herself from the cold that consumed her from within. Jack remained standing, staring at Megan, waiting for her to say why she was there. He didn't ask for explanations or pose questions. He simply waited, letting the silence weigh on her. Megan, on the other hand, avoided looking directly at him, as if the words were stuck in her throat. Inside, Jack knew this meeting would only be another scar. It didn't matter what she had to say. Within him, there was already a certainty: some choices cannot be undone. And that door, which she had walked through one day, would never open the same way again. As Megan remained silent, her trembling hands gripping the glass of water, Jack continued observing her, showing no urgency to hear what she had to say. He offered no comfort, nor did he open the space for a casual conversation. He simply waited, with the same calm gaze of someone who already knew how this story ended. Megan hesitated, but Jack didn't care how long it would take her. Inside him, the memories of that night were still intact, as vivid as the moment they happened. After she left for the party, Jack stayed alone, trying to convince himself that this argument was just another among many. He thought that maybe she'd change her mind once she arrived and realized that this choice wasn't worth it. He fooled himself into believing he could distract himself. He tried to watch the game on TV, but he couldn't focus. The unease grew, like a silent warning that something far worse was coming. Hours passed. It was late when Jack's phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from Kyle, an old friend, someone who knew Megan and was also at the party. Jack had no idea what he was about to see. When he opened the message, he found a video. Kyle, without saying a single word, had sent the recording without any warning. Out of pure impulse, Jack pressed play. In the first few seconds, the images showed loud music and flashing lights at the party. People laughed, danced, and drank. Then, suddenly, the camera focused on a scene Jack would never forget. Megan was there, in the middle of the room, clearly out of control, her hair messy and her gaze lost. She laughed loudly while dancing on the laps of two men, alternating between them as if enjoying the situation. The colleagues around encouraged the scene, cheering her on with shouts and applause. Every second of that video was like a stab to Jack's chest. He watched until the end, without blinking, without taking a deep breath, without interrupting. When the recording ended, he continued staring at the screen, as if trying to process what he had just seen. The images replayed in his mind, like a torturous cycle that refused to stop. At that moment, something inside him broke definitively. Jack stood up, went to the bedroom, and grabbed a suitcase. Without any rush, he began packing his clothes, his belongings, everything he needed to leave without looking back. The decision was made. He knew there was no turning back. He went to the office, accessed the bank accounts, and withdrew all the money that was there. Every penny was transferred to a new account, opened days earlier when the first signs of the marriage falling apart began to show. It was a cold and calculated move, but necessary. Jack knew he would need stability to start over. In silence, he reviewed everything he had gathered, stored the documents and cards, then wrote a simple, straightforward note, leaving no room for interpretation. "Don't look for me anymore." Those were the only words he left on the table, along with the wedding ring, which he removed from his finger without hesitation. He closed the door and left. The early morning felt empty, but Jack didn't think about a destination. He just drove, his heart numb and his mind focused on a single certainty: that chapter was closed. No tears fell, no screams were uttered, no doubts accompanied him. Everything felt clean and resolved. Jack disappeared. He left behind the city, friends, his old job, anything that could be a link to his previous life. Now, years later, Megan sat holding the glass of water as if trying to prevent the past from swallowing her whole again. Jack observed her, unhurried, with the serenity of someone who already knew every detail of this personal tragedy. She was still searching for the right words, but Jack knew that whatever excuse she had, what he saw in that video would never be forgotten. And that was all that mattered. Megan gripped the glass of water between her hands, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing right there. She took a deep breath, looking at the liquid in the glass, avoiding Jack's gaze. Her voice came out low, dragged, heavy with shame and pain, as if each word weighed tons. She began by saying that she remembered that night as a blur. She said that when she arrived at the party, everything seemed normal. Her colleagues were chatting, laughing, and the music filled the room. Amanda greeted her with her usual fake charm, offering her a drink right at the entrance. Megan explained that it was the first and only drink she accepted that night. After that sip, everything started spinning. She described feeling her body grow heavy, her vision blurry, her mind confused, as if she had been ripped from her own consciousness. She didn't know exactly how long she had been there, but she said she completely lost control. She couldn't remember the hours that followed, nor the faces around her, nor the things she did. The only thing she recalled were distorted flashes, as if she were trapped in a nightmare where voices mixed and her body moved without any command. Megan recounted waking up the next day, disoriented, on Amanda's couch. Her clothes were disheveled, her head pounding, and a bitter taste in her mouth. She said it took her a few minutes to figure out where she was. Once she realized, panic set in. She rushed out of there, still trying to regain her senses. When she got home, she found everything empty. She called for Jack, searched the rooms, but there was no sign of him. She went to the table and saw the note. Just one short sentence, like a verdict: "Don't look for me anymore." She said the ground disappeared beneath her feet at that moment. She grabbed her phone and tried to call him, but his number was already out of service. She called mutual friends, family members, searched every possible corner, but it was as if Jack had vanished. Only with time, after the pain of rejection, did she begin to suspect that something far worse had happened at that party. She said she insisted on understanding how everything spiraled out of control, and after pressuring some people, she uncovered the cruel truth: Amanda and other colleagues had orchestrated it. They had slipped a substance into her drink to make her lose control. Megan recounted being in shock to learn that it was all premeditated, planned as a cruel joke. Furious, she said she gathered evidence, hired lawyers, and filed a lawsuit against Amanda and those involved. She described enduring months in court, hearing lies and trying to clear her name, until the truth finally came out and she won the case. She said she received a large settlement, but no amount of money could compensate for the real suffering. The hardest moment, according to her, wasn't the exposure, the trial, or the public humiliation. She said the worst moment of all was when she received a call from Jack's lawyer, informing her that the divorce was finalized. She said that at that moment, everything that remained of what they had built crumbled completely. Despite everything she went through, Megan said she needed to see him. That she needed to talk to him, look him in the eyes, and tell him the truth, even though she knew it might not make a difference anymore. That's why she hired a private detective. She said it was a long, difficult, and exhausting search that crossed state lines, consumed time and money, until she finally found him in that isolated town. She raised her gaze, her eyes teary, and concluded by saying that now she was here, in front of him, holding that glass of water as if it were the only anchor keeping her standing at that moment. As she remained motionless, the glass trembled subtly in her hands, a reflection of the storm still consuming her from within. Megan, with a choked voice, still tried to find some small opening through which she could reach his heart. She said that everything she did, every effort, every search, every penny spent, was driven by the guilt that had consumed her since that night and by the love she still carried in her heart. She said that during this time, she had never been able to move on, that she woke up every day with the memory of his face and the pain of losing him. She insisted that, if she were in his place, she might have judged the same way. She begged him to consider giving her at least a chance to listen to what her heart was screaming. But Jack observed her with the same serenity he had maintained since the start of the conversation. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger, nor did he display any emotion that might give her hope. When he responded, he made sure to speak clearly, leaving no room for doubt. He said that life shows signs before a tragedy, and it's up to each person to decide what to do with those signs. He explained that, for him, the real problem wasn't the substance in the drink, nor the setup at that party. What destroyed everything was the choice she made to ignore the value of their marriage and the respect that had existed between them. He said that the moment she decided to turn her back on him, despite all the words, all the pleas for attention, the fate of their marriage was sealed. Jack stated that some choices cost too much, and that love, no matter how strong, isn't enough to erase scars that run too deep. Megan had no more strength to keep insisting. Her gaze wandered, empty, like someone who finally understands the depth of the abyss she dug with her own hands. Without saying anything else, she stood up and walked to the door. She left, carrying the weight of the certainty that she had lost everything, with no gesture of hope left. Jack remained seated, unmoving, until he heard the sound of the door closing. With the same calmness of someone who had just closed an old chapter, he stood up and went to the hallway. He called Vanessa, who had been waiting silently in the next room during the entire conversation. She appeared calm, without questions, with the understanding of someone who knew this night would be the final point of a story that had gone on too long. They remained there, sitting on the couch, unhurried, as if time had slowed down inside that room. Vanessa, sitting beside Jack, simply rested her hand on his knee, a simple gesture but full of complicity. Neither of them seemed in any hurry to get up. Her presence was calm, secure, as if she understood every detail of the situation without needing explanations. Jack broke the silence with a short phrase, spoken with the same calmness he had maintained throughout the night. He said that some wounds never disappear, no matter how much time passes or how many new stories begin. He explained that these marks aren't there to torture but to teach. He affirmed that everyone needs to learn that disrespecting someone's love and loyalty comes at too high a price, and that there isn't always a second chance to fix what was destroyed. Vanessa listened in silence, without interrupting, without questioning. The two of them stayed there, side by side, saying nothing more, simply sharing the certainty that this was truly the closing of a chapter that had weighed heavily on Jack's shoulders for so long. As he looked ahead, his gaze steady and calm, Jack knew that, finally, it was time to leave everything behind. Sitting next to someone who respected his history and his heart, he was fully aware that the last page had been turned. And there was nothing more to be said. Only peace. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.